Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. What you're about to hear is one of America's most haunting unsolved disappearances, a story that begins on a quiet July afternoon and leads deep into the wilderness of Wyoming. Amy Wroe Bechtel was young, athletic, newly married, and full of plans for the future. But one ordinary jog through the mountains turned into a mystery that has lasted for decades. Her car was found, her watch was found, but Amy was never seen again. This is her story. July 24th, 1997. Lander, Wyoming, a small, friendly town resting on the edge of the Wind River Mountains. That morning, 24-year-old Amy Wroe Bechtel woke up early. She was an avid runner, a college track athlete, and was training for her first big race, the upcoming 10K in Dubois. Her husband, Steve Bechtel, also an athlete and climbing instructor, left for a day of training with friends. Amy planned to map out part of her race route, a quiet stretch through Shoshone National Forest, a place she knew only from maps and stories. She stopped by the local camera shop to inquire about teaching a fitness class. Later, she was seen buying a few items at a convenience store around 2 p.m. That was the last confirmed sighting of her alive. A few hours later, when Amy failed to return home, her husband assumed she was still running or visiting friends. But as daylight began to fade and she still hadn't shown up, concern set in. By 10 p.m., he contacted police. Authorities immediately began searching the roads leading into the mountains. Around 1 a.m., they found Amy's white Toyota Tercel, abandoned along Loop Road, a rugged mountain pass about 15 miles south of Lander. Inside were her keys, her running shoes, and music tapes. The car wasn't damaged, no signs of a struggle, no blood, no footprints. It looked as if she had simply parked, stepped out, and vanished into thin air. Sheriff's deputies, volunteer searchers, and rescue dogs scoured the forest that night and the following days. Helicopters hovered over ravines and cliffs, calling her name. But the only things found were faint clues, possible footprints, a watch band similar to hers, and rumors of a strange vehicle spotted nearby. The mountains around Lander are vast, filled with rugged terrain and deep canyons. It's easy to get lost there. But Amy was an experienced outdoorswoman. The idea that she had simply gotten lost didn't fit, so if she hadn't fallen, and she hadn't gotten lost, then where was Amy Bechtel? By sunrise on July 25, 1997, the Bechtel case had already turned into one of the largest search operations Fremont County had ever seen. Dozens of volunteers, police officers, and experienced mountain rescuers gathered at the trailhead where Amy's Toyota had been discovered. Helicopters sliced through the cold morning air, scanning the steep valleys and rocky outcrops of Shoshone National Forest. The terrain was unforgiving. Dense pine forests, deep ravines, countless trails that led nowhere. The wind howled through the canyons, drowning out the calls of searchers shouting Amy's name. Steve Bechtel was there from the beginning, exhausted, distraught, but determined. His friends from the climbing community joined him, traversing cliffs and riverbeds with flashlights and radios. For several days, search dogs picked up faint scents that disappeared into the forest, as if Amy's trail had simply dissolved into thin air. The police found her car parked neatly off the road, facing downhill, the engine off, keys inside. The doors were unlocked, and her running clothes were gone. Investigators theorized she had parked there to start her jog along one of the logging roads, but no one saw her. Not a single hiker, ranger, or driver reported encountering her that day. What made things even stranger was the lack of anything. No torn clothing, no dropped items, not even a shoe print that could be confirmed as hers. The wilderness held its silence. As hours became days, the search radius expanded. Planes flew grid patterns. Mounted search teams on horseback combed ravines. Some volunteers even brought infrared imaging equipment, hoping to detect a heat signature from above. Nothing. The only thing they did find was a small watch, partially buried in mud, the same model Amy was known to wear. but without DNA or distinctive marks, police couldn't confirm it was hers. It became another piece of a growing puzzle with no picture. The media began to arrive. Satellite trucks parked along the highway. Reporters interviewed locals who said Amy was cheerful, athletic, and responsible. She wasn't the type to just walk away, one friend told the camera. But behind the calm exterior of the search, tension was rising. The sheriff's office began to suspect that the answer might not be in the mountains at all. If Amy hadn't fallen or gotten lost, maybe she had been taken. And if that was true, then the person responsible might be closer than anyone dared to imagine. As the days passed with no trace of Amy, the tone of the investigation began to change. What had started as a desperate search and rescue slowly turned into a criminal inquiry. By the end of the first week, sheriff's deputies realized something chilling. There was no evidence that Amy was still in the forest. Every lead, every possible trail ended abruptly. The idea of an accident grew less likely with each passing hour. In most missing person cases, investigators follow a basic principle: search the circle closest to the victim. That circle almost always begins with the spouse. Steve Bechtel, Amy's husband, quickly found himself at the center of suspicion. At first, he cooperated fully. He answered questions, joined the searches, and allowed officers to check his property. But soon, the tone of the interviews shifted. Detectives began to press harder, not about the mountains, but about his marriage. Amy and Steve had been married less than a year. They shared a passion for outdoor adventure, climbing, running, exploring. But friends told police that Amy sometimes felt overshadowed by Steve's intense training schedule. She wanted to start her own career, maybe teach fitness classes, maybe even start a family. Still, there was no evidence of violence or serious marital problems. The couple seemed happy, at least on the surface. But then came a discovery that changed everything. During a search of Steve's home, investigators found a personal journal, a notebook filled with song lyrics, workout notes, and disturbing passages about anger, control, and violence. Some of the entries were written in the first person, describing rage and fantasies of power. Authorities couldn't determine when the entries were written, but their tone alarmed detectives. Was it artistic expression or something darker? The discovery leaked to the press almost immediately. Headlines across Wyoming screamed, "Police find violent writings in missing jogger's husband's home." Reporters began camping outside Steve's house. Neighbors whispered. Friends withdrew. Overnight, the once-admired climbing instructor became the prime suspect in his wife's disappearance. Steve refused to speak further without a lawyer. He claimed the writings were creative exercises, nothing more. They were song lyrics, he told his attorney, not confessions. But investigators wanted more. They asked him to take a polygraph test. Steve refused, on the advice of his lawyer. To police, it looked like guilt. To his supporters, it was self-protection. Still, no physical evidence connected him to Amy's disappearance. No witnesses saw them arguing, no blood, no signs of struggle, and no motive that made sense. By August, the search had turned cold, and public opinion had turned against him. But one question lingered like an echo through the mountains. If Steve didn't harm his wife, then what really happened to Amy Bechtel? While detectives scrutinized Steve Bechtel's every move, a new lead began to take shape, one that pulled the investigation far away from Lander's peaceful neighborhoods and back toward the wilderness where Amy vanished. Several locals reported seeing a strange man in the mountains around the same time Amy disappeared. He was described as being in his 40s, driving a dark truck, and behaving oddly near one of the forest's trailheads. That man was Dale Wayne Eaton, a name that would later send chills through Wyoming law enforcement. Eaton was a loner, a drifter, often camping alone in the state's remote areas. He had a history of minor crimes and violent outbursts. Years later, he would be convicted for one of the most brutal murders in Wyoming's history, the killing of Lisa Marie Kimmel, whose body was found in a river after she vanished in 1988. Her case, known as the Lil Miss murder, had haunted the state for years. After Eaton's arrest in 2002, investigators began to wonder, could he have been responsible for Amy Bechtel's disappearance as well? The timeline seemed plausible. Eaton had lived less than 100 miles from Lander in 1997, and his truck, a dark, dented pickup, matched witness descriptions from the area where Amy's car was found. But back in 1997, no one had any reason to suspect him. Eaton wasn't on law enforcement's radar at the time. He was just another rugged local wandering the mountains. A hiker came forward years later, saying he saw a man who looked like Eaton parked near Burnt Gulch Road, not far from where Amy's car was discovered. The man was alone, sitting in his truck, staring at passing runners. The witness didn't think much of it back then, but after Eaton's murder conviction, the memory felt sinister. When police questioned Eaton in prison, he denied everything. "Never heard of her," he said coldly. But when detectives searched his property, they found a burial pit. Inside were bones, vehicle parts, and personal items from several missing women. None of them belonged to Amy, but it was enough to reignite suspicions. Eaton was sentenced to death in 2004 for Lisa Kimmel's murder. During interviews, he hinted at other victims. "There are things you'll never find," he once told a guard. Despite that, he never confessed to knowing Amy Bechtel, and when investigators showed him photos, he didn't even flinch. So was Dale Eaton the stranger on the mountain that day, or just another ghost haunting Wyoming's long list of unsolved cases? To this day, his connection to Amy remains circumstantial, one of many shadows in a case full of them. Weeks turned into months. Summer in Lander faded into the first chill of autumn, and the once massive search for Amy Bechtel began to shrink. Volunteers returned home. Helicopters were grounded. But for the investigators who remained, one haunting question refused to die. What had the mountain done with her? Deputies revisited Fremont Canyon, a remote, jagged stretch of wilderness not far from where Amy's car had been found. It was treacherous, filled with steep drops, hidden creeks, and thick clusters of pine that swallowed sound. Search dogs had alerted in that area during the first week, but no solid evidence was recovered. Now, as the terrain thawed and shifted, they hoped something new might surface. They combed through gulches, overturned logs, even crawled through small caves. Pieces of clothing appeared now and then, hiking gear, scraps of fabric bleached by the sun, but none matched what Amy had been wearing. One park ranger made a chilling observation. "You could bury an entire truck up here," he said, staring into the dark canyon floor. It wasn't exaggeration. The terrain could hide almost anything. Meanwhile, detectives reviewed early photographs of the scene, noticing details they had missed in the chaos of those first frantic days. Tire tracks, faint, almost erased by rain, curved off the road not far from Amy's Toyota. They didn't match her car's pattern. Could someone else have stopped there that same afternoon? A specialist from the Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigation analyzed the photos. The tracks appeared to belong to a larger vehicle, possibly a pickup or SUV, the kind of vehicle Dale Eaton drove. But without a full casting or measurement, it remained a frustrating maybe. Then there was the mysterious watch. Found early in the search, buried in silt along a nearby creek, it had been bagged and forgotten. When investigators tested it again, they confirmed it was the same make and model Amy owned. But there were hundreds of identical watches sold in the region. No serial number, no DNA, still no answers. The canyon offered whispers, not words. At one point, cadaver dogs reacted strongly near a section of burned forest. Excavations followed, and hopes rose. But what they uncovered was only the carcass of an elk. The team stood in silence, disappointment heavy in the air. Years later, experienced trackers would say that Fremont Canyon held the same eerie quality as Alaska's Vanishing Triangle, places where people disappear, leaving no sign of struggle, no final trace. For Amy, that silence became her legacy. The land itself seemed to guard the truth. But in 1998, 1 year after she vanished, a new discovery hundreds of miles away would throw the entire investigation into chaos. and point fingers right back at someone close to home. By mid-1998, nearly a year after Amy Bechtel's disappearance, the official search had long since been scaled back. Yet in Lander, the case remained alive, pulsing quietly beneath the surface of daily life. Posters with Amy's smiling face still hung on gas station windows, faded by the Wyoming sun. People still whispered in diners, wondering if her husband, Steve Bechtel, was guilty, or if the mountains were hiding something far worse. Then a discovery brought the case roaring back into headlines. A journalist working on a feature about the investigation filed a Freedom of Information Act request to the Fremont County Sheriff's Office. What he received shocked him and the entire state. Among the released materials was a detailed inventory of Steve Bechtel's personal writings, notebooks, journals, and scraps of paper seized during the early stages of the investigation. The contents were strange. Some pages described feelings of rage and isolation, while others included short passages about control, domination, and death. One fragment read, "Murder is the ultimate exercise of control." Investigators had seen those lines before, but now the public had too. Almost overnight, the media reignited the narrative that had simmered for months, that Steve Bechtel had murdered his wife, hidden the body, and outsmarted the search teams. Reporters crowded outside his home once again. Television crews replayed dramatic sound bites. Online forums exploded with speculation. Steve's attorney condemned the leak as grossly irresponsible. He explained that the writings were college-era notes taken from a psychology class mixed with lyrics from songs Steve had written years earlier. "They're not evidence of anything," he said firmly. Still, for many, the damage was done. Even members of Amy's family, who had always defended Steve, began to grow uneasy. Some wondered if there were things about the marriage they hadn't seen. The pressure on Steve became unbearable. He withdrew completely from public view, refusing all interviews. He continued to maintain his innocence, stating simply, "I had nothing to do with Amy's disappearance. I loved her." But behind the scenes, detectives continued to probe his timeline. They learned that on the day Amy vanished, Steve had been rock climbing with friends, but his alibi contained a small, unaccounted window of time. Roughly 1 hour during which he was alone, driving between climbing sites. It wasn't proof of guilt, but in a case without a body, every minute unaccounted for became a shadow. The notebook revelation polarized the town of Lander. Half believed Steve was a misunderstood husband. The other half saw him as a murderer hiding in plain sight. And as investigators dug deeper, one more disturbing connection emerged. A link between Amy's route that day and another man's property not far from the forest road. A man whose name would soon become synonymous with fear in rural Wyoming. While the media obsession focused on Steve Bechtel, a quieter lead had been simmering in the background. A man who lived less than 5 miles from the stretch of road where Amy's car was discovered. Locals knew him simply as the man down the road, a reclusive, middle-aged mechanic who kept to himself and owned several acres of rugged property at the edge of Shoshone National Forest. His name was Timothy Binden, though in police files he was often referred to as the neighbor. When deputies canvassed the area in the days after Amy's disappearance, Binden told them he had seen a small white car parked near the forest road that afternoon, possibly Amy's Toyota. But he claimed he hadn't noticed anyone around it. He spoke calmly, even helpfully, volunteering details about other hikers in the area. His account seemed routine. But a few months later, a retired investigator reviewing early statements noticed inconsistencies. Binden's timeline of events didn't line up with other witnesses. He said he'd seen the car at 3:30 p.m., but another driver had passed the same area around that time and reported the spot empty. When detectives returned to question Binden again, he'd moved, suddenly and without explanation. His property was empty, the small cabin abandoned. That might have been the end of it, until 1999, when a pair of hunters stumbled upon a makeshift fire pit deep in the woods behind where Binden's home once stood. Among the ashes were fragments of metal, half-melted glass, and what appeared to be part of a watch band. It was never conclusively tied to Amy, but the discovery reopened the theory that someone in the area, not Steve Bechtel, not a random killer like Dale Eaton, had been involved. Neighbors recalled Bindon as quiet but peculiar. He avoided eye contact, owned multiple vehicles, and was known to patrol his property late at night with a flashlight. One woman said he once offered to show her a shortcut through the woods that she politely declined. Fremont County investigators attempted to track him down. Records showed that after moving from Wyoming, Bindon resurfaced briefly in Montana, then vanished again. There was no forwarding address, no employment record, no family contacts. It was as if he'd erased himself. For years, the man down the road remained a ghost in the margins of the Bechtel file, a name without proof, a suspect without evidence. Still, some detectives privately admitted they believed he knew more than he ever told them, and yet, like so many other leads in this case, his trail ended where it began, in the wilderness. In time, new technology would breathe life back into old evidence, including DNA recovered from items once considered useless. The hope was simple. If Amy's remains were ever found, perhaps the truth would finally follow. But that moment never came. By the early 2000s, Amy Bechtel's name had become synonymous with the word vanished. In Wyoming, everyone knew the story. A bright young runner who disappeared into the forest and never returned. Yet years after that July afternoon, detectives still refused to close the case. Something about it wouldn't rest, like the mountains themselves were holding on to a secret. Sheriff's investigator Captain Joe Steiger was one of those who couldn't let go. Each year, on the anniversary of Amy's disappearance, he would reopen her file, hoping that time or technology might finally reveal something new. In 2004, he submitted old evidence for modern DNA testing. The car handles, the interior seatbelt, the watch fragment, and several hair strands recovered near the creek. None produced usable results. The case grew colder, but the questions only deepened. Reporters still called every July. True crime TV specials re-examined the timeline, interviewing friends and experts who offered conflicting theories. Some insisted that Amy had been abducted and murdered. Others believed she'd suffered an accident and her body was simply never found in the vast terrain. Her husband, Steve Bechtel, had long since rebuilt his life, moving on, remarrying, starting a family. Yet, he never escaped the shadow of suspicion. Whenever new articles or documentaries appeared, his name resurfaced alongside Amy's, his face forever tied to an unanswered question. Then came an unexpected twist. In 2007, a former inmate from a Colorado prison claimed he had once met a man who bragged about killing a runner in Wyoming. The man allegedly described details that matched Amy's case: a woman in her 20s, a white car, and a remote forest road. Investigators chased the lead for months. They tracked down the inmate, the supposed storyteller, and even excavated an area he mentioned, but it led nowhere. Still, the rumor reignited public interest. The story of the missing runner from Lander once again dominated state headlines. As technology advanced, detectives digitized every scrap of the case: phone logs, photos, search maps, journals, and interviews. The FBI profilers, who later reviewed it, came to the same conclusion local authorities had reached years earlier: that Amy likely met with foul play, probably within hours of her disappearance. And yet, without a body, no one could prove it. In time, the forest reclaimed the search sites, trails were regraded, trees regrew, and nature quietly erased what little evidence had ever existed. But to those who had searched for her, Amy's face never faded. Her friend, former Olympic runner Linda Pape, summed it up best: "It's not just that she's gone, it's that she's nowhere. That's what haunts us." Even after decades, investigators refused to use the word cold. They still called it open, a case that simply refused to die. After nearly 3 decades, the disappearance of Amy Wroe Bechtel has become more than just a case. It's a haunting legend of the American wilderness. Entire generations in Wyoming grew up hearing her name whispered like a ghost story, the runner who vanished into thin air. But behind every rumor and every theory, there's a family still waiting for truth that may never come. Over the years, three dominant theories have come to define the investigation. 1. The husband theory. The first and most persistent is that Amy's husband, Steve Bechtel, was responsible. Those who believe it point to his inconsistent timeline, the notebook excerpts, and his refusal to cooperate with law enforcement after initially answering questions. They claim his demeanor, calm, detached, and oddly analytical, reflected guilt. But others defend him, arguing that grief manifests differently. Steve's friends insist he was destroyed by Amy's disappearance, and his choice to stop engaging with investigators came after relentless public accusations and media harassment. No physical evidence has ever tied him to foul play. 2. The stranger abduction. The second theory centers on the idea that Amy was abducted, possibly by someone she crossed paths with while jogging that day. Wyoming highways were often used by long-haul truckers and drifters, and investigators believe she could have accepted a ride or been ambushed near her parked car. This theory gained traction after Dale Wayne Eaton, a convicted murderer and suspected serial killer, was briefly investigated. Eaton had abducted and killed another Wyoming woman, Lisa Kimmel, in 1988, less than 100 miles from where Amy disappeared. However, authorities could never connect him to Amy's case, and DNA from his known crimes did not match anything from her car. 3. The wilderness accident. The final theory is the simplest, and perhaps the most tragic. Amy was an experienced outdoors woman, but unfamiliar with that particular terrain. Some believe she may have ventured off the road, fallen into one of the steep ravines, or been swept away by sudden summer runoff. The wilderness around Lander is vast, with caves, creeks, and thick forests that could hide a body indefinitely. In the end, every theory leads to the same wall of silence. The lack of evidence, no blood, no clothing, no remains, makes each possibility as likely as the next. What remains is the emotional weight of uncertainty. Amy's parents died without answers. Her siblings still hold out hope that a hiker, a hunter, or a new DNA technology might someday find a trace of her. For the rest of Wyoming, Amy became a symbol, a reminder of how fragile even the safest moments can be, and how a single afternoon can vanish into eternity. The mountain didn't just take Amy, it took the truth with her. Today, the road where Amy Bechtel vanished looks almost unchanged. The same bends, the same scent of pine and dust. A few hikers pass through every summer, unaware that they're walking over a landscape that once held one of Wyoming's most enduring mysteries. Time, it seems, has a way of concealing the past, but not erasing it. Amy's disappearance didn't just shatter her family, it changed the small town of Lander forever. For months after she vanished, women stopped jogging alone. Parents warned their children not to wander into the woods. And even now, when a local sees a white Toyota parked off a forest trail, they remember her. The runner who never came home. In 2014, the FBI officially classified Amy's case as an open missing person investigation. They continue to receive tips every few years. Hikers reporting possible bone fragments, hunters finding weathered shoes, or drivers recalling strange encounters from that July afternoon. Every lead is investigated. Every hope ends the same. A few years ago, a trail runner found an old stopwatch buried under moss along Loop Road. It was rusted, the screen cracked, and the initials AWB faintly etched on the back. For a brief moment, it seemed like Amy's ghost had left a message, but after testing, investigators couldn't confirm it was hers. It was just another artifact swallowed by the mountain, another false echo, and yet people still search. Volunteers, amateur sleuths, and journalists continue to visit the area, trying to connect the dots. Some bring drones, others bring hope, but none bring Amy home. In Wyoming folklore, they now call it the day the mountain took her, a phrase that captures both the natural beauty and the silent menace of the wilderness. Whether Amy met a stranger, slipped into the forest, or simply vanished by accident, the mountain has never told its secret. Her husband, Steve, in a rare interview decades later, said quietly, "If you ever find her, tell her I still run the same trails, and I still wait. The forest doesn't answer. It never does. Only the wind carries her name now, faint, uncertain, but still there, an echo in the mountains." What happened to Amy Wroe Bechtel remains one of America's most haunting mysteries, a life full of promise, erased in a moment no one saw. If stories like this move you, if you believe that every missing person deserves to be remembered, please take a moment to like this video, share it, and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive and gives a voice to those who can no longer speak for themselves. Somewhere, someone knows what happened, and together we might still find the truth.